freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to assemble, freedom of expression, your First Amendment rights that belong to every American in the United States. Is this a hard concept to understand? We're going to find out. Let's go. This is Stephanie, and this is Truth Detective. I am your very own Truth Detective, finding out the facts and evidence on just about any topic: culture, society, U.S. news, world news, our justice system, corruption, and so much more. There is no topic that is off limits here. I want to thank my first-time listeners here for tuning in to Truth Detective, and I hope that you enjoy this episode and want to listen to more at truthdetectivepodcast.com. Just a note from me before we begin that this is not at all a complete or comprehensive research on this subject. There is so much more online and books to be read about the subject of free speech and dissent. The links that are in these show notes will get you started. So let's start out saying that we all know there is a Constitution in the United States of America. We learned it in school, and we mostly know what it entails. But the First Amendment is probably one of the more important amendments because it talks about our freedom of speech. That is really important. If we didn't have freedom of speech, we wouldn't have anything. We wouldn't be able to write books, have opinions, do podcasts, do television shows. We wouldn't be able to have movies or have any expression of art or have any opinions at all. We would be silenced. And so we would live a very boring life without our freedom of speech. There are some people in the United States that want to take that away from us. Yes, sir, the First Amendment rights are our bedrock from the Founding Fathers that still exist to this day. And thank goodness. Of course, we all know that the United States of America has always been called a melting pot of everybody in the world. So how can you or me or anybody tell anyone else that there's only one way to think and all other ways are wrong, and therefore they will silence those people? Yes, it's truly something to think about. You know, in some of my episodes, I love to give quotes, and this episode is especially important. So let me give you a little background, and then I'll share the quote. Evelyn Beatrice Hall was so enlightened by Voltaire that she wrote a book on Voltaire called The Friends of Voltaire. Voltaire was a French Enlightenment writer, historian, and philosopher famous for his wit, his attacks on the established Catholic Church, and his advocacy of freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and separation of church and state. These are some of the ideas that Voltaire is famous for. Well, in The Friends of Voltaire, Hall wrote the phrase, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," as an illustration of Voltaire's beliefs. This quotation, which is sometimes misattributed to Voltaire himself, is often cited to describe the principle of free speech. So why is this such a hot-button topic today, right now, for me? Well, a couple of weeks ago, at Podcast Movement in Dallas, where I go every year, there was a kerfuffle about conservative podcaster and co-owner of The Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, showing up at the Podcast Movement Conference exhibition floor to see what his $30,000 booth that he set up on the expo floor looked like. You know as well as I do from my past episodes how I feel about free speech. He had every right to be there and see what the Daily Wire booth looked like. Ben posed for pictures, shaking hands with other podcasters. It really was a non-event that most people didn't even know about. But there was backlash for him to be able to freely speak his views. This sent a crippling firestorm from the podcast movement founders as they wrote a 3-tweet apology to those, one person, he offended. In this apology, Podcast Movement admitted they had made a mistake by selling the Daily Wire a booth in the first place, and that they will do better next time. The pathetic apology continued. Here, podcast movement is deeply apologetic, and of course, the Daily Wire responded, as it should. Listen to this.
Yesterday afternoon, Ben Shapiro briefly visited the PM22 Expo. Though he was not registered or expected, we take full responsibility for the harm done by his presence.
So do I get to get a picture?
1, 2, 3.
God bless you.
Hey, thank you.
We agreed to sell the Daily Wire a first-time booth based on the company's large presence in podcasting. The weight of that decision is now painfully clear.
All right, Ben, pleasure to meet you. Good to meet you.
During event planning, the dangerous nature of the company's messaging was overlooked.
I love what you're saying. No, thank you.
Those of you who called this unacceptable are right. Podcast movement has made mistakes. The pain caused by this one will always stick with us.
Yeah, thanks for everything you do. Hey, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you so much for coming. This is huge.
And here, a reaction from Jeremy Boring, co-founder of the Daily Wire.
But I will say this. We will not allow podcast movement to continue to present itself as a neutral place. If you're a conservative podcaster, they don't want you there. Yeah. If you're a conservative podcaster and you're with any of the major podcasting companies, they don't care to defend you. Yeah. They want to make money off of your success while your political foes try to destroy you. And then they will watch you die when the left finally does land the kill shot. And then they will shake their heads, find another conservative talent, and go extract money quietly from them. It's even worse. That's the game.
It certainly didn't go unnoticed that this apology that podcast movement was making was wrong to most podcasters and non-podcasters alike because of the freedom of speech in the First Amendment. It doesn't seem to match the description of the conference and its diverse community of podcasters that podcast movement has always touted, the ultimate annual destination for diverse speakers, education, and networking. That is podcast movement's mission. It says it on their website. Ben Shapiro and all the Daily Wire podcasters are diverse speakers. There's no doubt. If Shapiro's conservative and Orthodox Jewish human being, quote unquote, being present at the conference offended anyone, it was most of the Twitters that angrily responded to the very lengthy and inappropriate apology from the podcast movement leadership. I was one of the first to respond and got positive support and likes, with over 5,000 likes to my tweet, tweeting what I found to be my truth. I stated, "What is wrong with open voices and free speech?" Ben is a human being with his own thoughts and opinions. We aren't open to different voices. That Ben can't come for a short time to represent the sixth biggest network and growing is insane. Be happy for the success, for his success, for Daily Wire's success. This leads to a bigger question. Why don't we want to hear from all sides and views? Perhaps we can learn from people we have seemingly nothing in common with. It's so true. Instead of throwing the Daily Wire under the bus and making an international outcry with a pathetic apology from podcast movement, maybe, just maybe, other fellow podcasters could learn a thing or two about actual podcasting and growing their podcast and network. What a concept for a conference. Podcasters learning from other podcasters. Yeah. The Daily Wire is the sixth biggest network and rising, showcasing the Ben Shapiro podcast, with Shapiro being number one in the United States in political podcasts, Matt Walsh's podcast, author of What is a Woman, and Jordan Peterson's podcast on the paid subscription, Daily Wire Plus. Ben Shapiro never approached anyone with weapons. He didn't shout or run around madly spewing hate to other podcasters, and he was there for a mere 20 minutes. So why such a reaction? Because he shows dissent, a different opinion that is vastly different from anybody on the other side. It begs for listeners to question everything, listen to those views that are vastly different, and maybe concede to a different view. Perhaps Maybe. Shapiro has traditional values that may stem from his Orthodox Jewish conservative background. He is grounded in his traditional beliefs. No one is going to change Shapiro's views, and he is unapologetic about his point of view and what he believes, as he should be. And as he rightly states, he will not apologize. We all, and not just podcasters, ought to take this as a watershed moment, as this story here about podcast movement, the Daily Wire, and Ben Shapiro has become an international free speech story picked up by newspapers, television, radio, and other podcasts, including Joe Rogan. Listen here to Joe Rogan as he explains about what happened and his feelings about what went down.
So they have this podcast conference, and the Daily Wire, they have a bunch of booths, right? So the Daily Wire takes out a booth, and Ben Shapiro goes. So Ben Shapiro goes, and he's there, and he's meeting people that are podcast fans, and they're all coming up to him, and they're real friendly to him. They're taking photos with him and stuff like that. And then afterwards, they release a statement talking about the harm that did.
What?
And how they were not aware, like the people who ran this podcast thing, the harm in bringing in Ben Shapiro that was very damaging to people.
What's harmful about
let's see if
Ben
we can
Shapiro?
find,
Bring him in.
See if we can
He's
find
like,
what their quotes were. That there was like danger to it or something. I forget the words they used, but it was one of those things where you read, you're like, what are you saying?
They're
like,
just apologies to people so they keep doing their business.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
They don't
like,
really believe any of that
they
they're
have some of the top podcasts in the country.
Oh, yeah.
So it makes sense that they would be there. Hi, folks. We owe you an apology before sessions kick off for the day. Yesterday afternoon, Ben Shapiro briefly visited
They
the
want to be like
PM22 Expo area near the Daily Wire booth. Though he was not registered or expected, we take full responsibility for the harm. But he's one of the owners of the Daily Wire.
By the harm done by his
or
presence.
expected. He was there. He was one of the co-founders. Yeah, there it is. There's no way around it. We agreed to sell the Daily Wire a first-time booth based on the company's large presence in podcasting, which it should be.
Yeah.
That's what you're representing. The weight of that decision is now painfully clear.
So
Shapiro
painful.
is a co-founder. A drop-in, however unlikely, should have been considered a possibility. Those of you who call this unacceptable, in quotes, are right.
He's the least threatening guy on the planet.
You could just
In 9 wonderful years growing and
Throw his
celebrating
yarmulke.
this medium, PM has made mistakes. The pain
We'll all
always stick with us. The pain caused by this one will always stick with us. We promise that sponsors will be more carefully considered moving forward.
Oh, we're fucked.
Folks, people are in a cult. They're in a cult.
We are
They're in a
fucked
cult.
as a
Like,
society.
you can't entertain any views that are different than yours. You can't allow people.
Especially Ben Shapiro.
He briefly stopped by.
He's 5'8".
Oh, we'll live
Bro,
with this for the rest of our lives.
It's just conversations. It's like people have opinions on one side and people have opinions on the other side. But all they're doing is having conversations.
Yeah.
You have video of him
A fucking podcast.
stopping by? What if he started?
Hello,
Yeah,
everybody.
it's him.
How's
I'll
everybody
take
doing?
some pictures.
People are like, oh, it's so painful.
Painfully clear.
Hi,
Look,
I'd
there's
like
all
to
these
take
people
pictures
taking
with you.
photos with him.
It's a pleasure to meet you as well. Thank you.
Listen, the way to handle people that you disagree with
Where's
is
Mel
to
Gibson?
fucking
Where's
debate
Mel Gibson
them.
when you need him, dude?
The way
He
to
would give
handle
Shapiro a knuckle
people,
sandwich.
they should
That's
have
true.
conversations with him publicly.
Got a nice suit.
But this is bullshit. Like, to say that it was a bad idea to let that guy there is crazy. Of course it's a good idea. It doesn't mean you agree with everything he says.
But you don't
have 100 fucking booths there. How could you agree with everybody?
And so it is, not only with Joe Rogan, but the snowball train wreck that's going downhill just gets bigger and bigger and faster, as we found out from allaccess.com that Cumulus Podcast Network, a huge network of podcasts, will no longer be a sponsor at Podcast Movement. This is definitely a line in the sand that we have been hoping for, saying that all Americans have the right to free speech and to have dissenting views as citizens of the United States. To have dissent has always been a great thing, for it really means to have or express an opinion different from a prevailing or official position. To disagree, rendering a minority opinion, difference of opinion or feeling, disagreement, and nonconformity. Or in simpler terms, just hoping that we can get our point across and perhaps understand each other better. It has been in our history all over the world to have dissenters. And it comes from Old French, des, or directly from Latin, dis, D-I-S, which means apart, asunder, in a different direction. And so that can be our takeaway, what we learned from podcast movement this year. But after this happened, it made me wonder, what else can I learn about this watershed moment? Maclean's.ca website has an article entitled, Why We Need Dissenters as Badly as Ever. It says here, author and lawyer William Kaplan calls a dissenter someone who plays the crucial but rare role of devil's advocate to cut through groupthink and inform better, more just decisions. These are public protesters, scrupulous judges, and anyone willing to confront what they see as institutionalized injustice. And that's what we look for. Kaplan explores the value of dissenters in recent history, how they've helped end suffering or corruption or avoid catastrophes by daring to blow the whistle or simply offer an alternative perspective. Dissent is noisy, messy, inconvenient, costly, often misplaced, sometimes laughable, usually badly timed, and almost always time-consuming, he writes. But the price of not listening to dissenters is far higher than its costs. Yes, sirree, it's becoming increasingly apparent that dissenters are the especially important ones to listen to. Not the people who share our values and see things the way we see things. They're important too. But the people who say, stop, listen, I've got something different to say, some other ways of looking at things, are especially valuable. A lot of what we see and think depends on who we are and where we come from and where we came from. And I think it's important to listen to as many people as possible as we confront all the big challenges we have in society, especially lately. Many of the dissenters Kaplan profiled are people who had incredible courage and faced all sorts of attacks for standing up and challenging the status quo. We might even go as far as to say the Founding Fathers and their dissent in fighting to have a better and greater country is what makes America so great today. Sure, there are problems, but Stephanie here, know and believe that these problems can be solved. And in redstate.com, I found this. There is the article entitled, Dissent is the Highest Form of Patriotism, but Not Online. It states that dissent is saying that there will be no questioning at all. Expressing doubts may lead to questions, and those questions may lead to answers that inconvenience the established narrative. Well, we see a lot of that lately. We need to exist in a country where free speech is a celebrated value, from your neighborhood streets to the halls of Washington. The idea of dissenting against power should be as cherished as it is annoying to those who are being dissented against. The opposition wants you censored, whether you're an insane conspiracy theorist or just a person asking basic questions that run too close to exposing a reality they'd rather the people not see. Nothing is more inconvenient to the powerful than dissent, and those who try their hardest to keep dissent from happening are the ones who truly aren't freedom-loving thinkers. There is truly an opportunity here to talk instead of shouting, to oppose without hard debates, and to see others as fellow Americans with views, beliefs, and values that may be different from yours, and that's okay. This is an ongoing discussion that we should always have, that ought to be heard by everybody everywhere, even those with dissenting views that are hurtful and hated. We can meet in the middle and, at the very least, agree to disagree. And remember to question everything, but also to be kind to everybody everywhere. Active online and in-person discussions are encouraged about dissenting views. And about podcast movement, who knows what's going to happen to the organization that puts on this yearly conference for podcasters. But I do know that this has changed the whole podcast industry forever. Hey, if you've enjoyed this episode, that's great, and I love that. Go to truthdetectivepodcast.com to get to all my episodes, the show notes. The links are in the show notes. And guess what? There's a little bio on me if you're wondering what I'm all about. You can also share this episode, and that just may start the conversation about what needs to happen going forward. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time on Truth Detective. Okay, bye-bye.